take a moment to think about some of the conversations that you've had recently. Maybe even just the ones that you've had this morning. So maybe your day began talking about the day's activities with a spouse or a partner. Or maybe you had a lot of negotiations to get the kids ready for school. Maybe you had a quieter morning because you live alone and yet you still had to take that very important phone call with a client. Maybe like me, you walked the dog and chatted with the neighbor about the new house going up over the road. Maybe you had a deep, soulful conversation about love and life with a friend. Or maybe a very lighthearted interaction as you came into Gullivan Hall today and met someone new. Conversations are happening everywhere, and we use them to participate in life, or use a clicker. So we use conversations to participate in life. So they allow us to build relationships, conduct work, raise children, access services, engage in our communities, and the list goes on. We use conversations to navigate our worlds, creating meaning and fulfillment in our lives. And on the surface, conversation is this seemingly simple act. So there are two roles, talking, listening, and as conversational partners, we take turns playing these roles as the message is being exchanged. But it turns out that having a good conversation, so one of those conversations that you really enjoy or is productive, or just a conversation that you feel like maybe you would like to have again, this is going to be a much more complicated process. So I want to show you the transcripts of two conversations and walk you through them. Now these are conversations between two teenage girls, but the idea that I'm going to illustrate here is applicable across the lifespan. Okay, so for the first conversation, speaker one says, "Hi." Speaker two, "Hi. What's your favorite subject in school?" "I like language arts. How about you?" "Yeah, I like that too." "What do you like about language arts?" I like the writings we do in my class." "Yeah, we write some essays every now and then too." So this seems like a fairly standard get-to-know-you conversation. The words all make sense, there are no obvious errors, and socially everything seems appropriate. Let me show you another conversation. Which is your favorite class of all?" "Probably ELA." "Mine too, 'cause like all the other ones are." "Yeah, they're kind of boring, especially I like science, but I don't like the..." "I like science, but I don't like Mr. Glynn's." "Yeah, very much. I mean, I like doing math, but I'm not." "Yeah, I'm not, yeah." So compared to the first conversation, this one feels really disjointed. There are a lot of unfinished sentences, and it's difficult to tell what's actually going on. But I want to show you the conversations of these videos.
Hi. What's your favorite subject in school?
Like language arts. How about you?
Yeah, I like that too.
What do you like about language arts?
I really like to read and to write. So, yeah. How about you?
I like the writings we do in my class.
Yeah, we write some essays every now and then. Too.
So I think we can all agree that something about this conversation feels very uncomfortable. But what's interesting is that if we look at these two people individually, it's actually difficult to pinpoint where that breakdown is occurring. So as we saw from the transcripts, the girls are using appropriate language, they're answering one another's questions, and as we see in the video, the girls are easy to understand, there are no obvious speech errors, their speech properties fall well within the typical limits for their age and gender. But when we put these two individuals together within a conversation, something about the way they're coordinating their speech or not coordinating their speech, which is actually the case here, makes this conversation feel awkward, even a little painful. So I think we should watch the second video.
Which is your favorite class of all? Probably ELA. Mine too, because like all the other ones are just, yeah, they're kind of boring, especially, I I like science. I don't like Mr. Glenn's. Yeah. I mean, I like doing math, but I'm not. Yeah.
Okay, firstly, poor Mr. Glenn's, but what a difference from that first conversation. Same prompt, same setting. One of the individuals is even the same. But in contrast to that first conversation, these individuals are coordinating their speech with one another in a way that makes the conversation feel much more successful, much more natural. So what science tells us is that to experience good conversations, we cannot function as individual entities, so you and me, but rather we must collaborate our behaviors, coordinating our speech in very meaningful ways. So there are several different coordinating mechanisms at play during successful conversations, but one of the key behaviors, and one that we study heavily in my research lab, is something called conversational entrainment. So what is this? When humans interact, they modify their behaviors to be more like one another. And so we see this in dance when partners coordinate their movements with one another, and it should occur in conversation. So if I'm talking to someone who speaks more slowly than I do, I will reduce my speaking rate to more closely match them. Likewise, they should speed up to more closely match me. Now, this entrainment, this becoming more similar to our conversational partner, isn't just in the rate of our speech, so how fast or how slow we talk. It's actually a whole body event. So we see it in other speech behaviors, things like the pitch of our voices, the volume of our speech. Ever notice that when someone starts to whisper, you automatically start to whisper too? Or when your partner raises their voice at you, you quickly raise your voice to match them. We also see it in the words that we use or the expressions that we use. If I'm talking to someone, this actually happened to me last week, and they use the word like a lot. Like, I was driving down this very dark road and something jumped out at me. Turns out I'm going to start using the word like a lot when I'm talking to that particular person. I'm sure that you can all think about times when you found yourself using a word or an expression that you wouldn't normally use, but the person that you're talking to is using it a lot, and so you just start to use it too. We also see this entrainment in eye contact, posture, facial expression, laughter, gestures. It really is a whole body event. So in successful conversations, we are no longer individuals, but rather we are tightly linked with our conversational partner, engaging in this very dynamic, collaborative joint action, if you will, a conversational dance. And this is what entrainment is all about. It's the syncing up our behaviors with our conversational partner. And this entrainment actually has a function. It's really important for cognitive, emotional, and social aspects of conversation. So what that means is it's really important for conversational success. So there's a pretty large body of literature, including studies from my research lab, showing that conversational partners who are highly entrained will have more productive conversations. So they solve problems faster, they solve problems more accurately. Studies in our lab have also shown that people who are highly entrained will have higher quality conversations, they'll take turns better, and they'll be able to navigate that conversational space better. People also show that partners will rate their partner as being more competent, likable, and friendly if they entrain. So entrainment sort of serves as a social glue that unites individuals in time and space. Researchers have gone as far as to say that our human capacity to synchronize or entrain with one another may in fact be essential for our survival as social beings. So the fact that this entrainment is so important for successful conversation certainly raises the question of, can it break down, right? And it turns out that it can for all of us. So we all experience conversations with low entrainment from time to time. I'm sure if I asked you to think about it, you could probably all think about people that you just don't seem to connect well with in conversations. You can never quite pinpoint what the issue is, but something about the conversation just feels awkward, disjointed, disconnected, and you want it to be over with pretty fast. In these particular conversations, it could be that entrainment is really low. So we steer clear of these sorts of conversations. So we actually avoid people who we can't entrain with, or we try and keep those conversations as brief as possible. And why do we sometimes experience low entrainment? Well, there are several reasons. Some are more simple and some are more complicated. So I'm going to start with some more simple and then get more complicated as the talk goes on. But at a very simple level, sometimes we just don't entrain because the person that we're communicating with has just a very different or unfamiliar way of speaking. And so perhaps you've experienced a disjointed or disconnected conversation when talking with someone with a foreign accent. Maybe even someone with a New Zealand accent. Sometimes we just can't quite coordinate our speech and match one another, and that feeling of connection and success eludes us. But what if you experience that lack of connection and success almost every single day with almost every single conversation that you engaged in? For people with communication disorders, this can in fact be their reality. So Lisa talked a little bit about my background. Before moving into research, I was a speech-language pathologist who worked in a hospital with clients with communication disorders. Now, the term communication disorders is of course very broad-ranging. It refers to any difficulty with the ability to talk to or to understand others. And so there are of course many different types and they affect all ages. But in my role as an SLP in the hospital setting, I worked with patients with communication disorders following neurological conditions. So things like Parkinson's disease, brain injury, and stroke. And in my role as their SLP, I witnessed firsthand just this profound consequence that these communication disorders have on somebody's ability to participate in their life. So this includes things like loss of, loss of relationships, loss of employment, difficulty accessing services, and this includes critical services such as healthcare, reduced community involvement. So this is of course not good. It's certainly not good for people with communication disorders, but it's also not good for those of us without a communication disorder. We miss out on these people's very important contributions to our lives, our communities, and our societies. So we all lose when people with communication disorders cannot effectively engage and interact with those around them. And so there wasn't many effective treatments for people with neurological communication disorders, and so I moved into research with the goal of changing this. So the goal of my work has always been at the heart to improve communication for people with neurological communication disorders. And there are two novel approaches that I've taken to doing this. One is looking at entrainment and other coordinating mechanisms, and the other is communication partner training. Now, these are two different approaches, but they intersect in really important ways. So we're going to talk through both of them in the rest of the talk today. But we're going to return to that research on entrainment. So remember, entrainment is how two people become more similar throughout a conversation. So in my lab, we've developed methods to quantify the level of entrainment in people's conversations. So what that means is we record conversations and then we extract a ton of speech properties from the signal, so things like pitch, volume, speaking rate, speaking rhythm, and a whole lot more. We also transcribe the conversations and extract all of the words and the linguistic features. And then what we do is we look how closely communication partners are able to become more similar on these particular features. So one way we can look at this is whether they're able to immediately coordinate. So meaning that if I do something, you immediately do the same thing. If I do something else, you immediately do this other thing. So a little bit like what's happening on this figure. Speaker 1 is the red data point, speaker 2 is the blue data point, and you can see them moving in tandem with one another. Sometimes it takes people a little bit more time to entrain with their conversational partner, and so throughout the course of the conversation, they become more similar to one another. So we've got a lot of different ways that we can quantify just how much people are entraining in conversations. So as an example, this is the speech rate data from one of our studies where two people are engaged in a very highly entrained conversation. So you can see that as one partner speaks faster, the other partner immediately goes faster. As they slow down, their partner immediately slows down. In contrast, this is the speech rate data from a communication partner pair who have very low entrainment. So you can see that they are not modulating their speech rate in tandem with one another. And so these two figures are actually from a study that we were looking at what makes some people good entrainers and bad entrainers, even without communication disorders, because there's a wide range of abilities. And what we found, just of interest here, is that people with good rhythm perception skills, so they're able to detect speech rhythms, have much better entrained conversations than those with low speech rhythm perception skills. So rhythm perception translates really closely with whether you're a musician or not. So I think this means that the musicians might be having the better conversations. Okay, but my lab has been the first lab in the field to look at entrainment and to quantify entrainment in the conversations of people with neurological communication disorders. And unfortunately, what we've found is that these conversations have very low levels of entrainment in them. Further, we've found that these low levels of entrainment predict some of the negative communication outcomes that these people experience in their conversations. And so we must have ways to improve entrainment, or we must find ways to improve entrainment. But how do we do this? To do this, we have to consider the basic building blocks of how people entrain. So in order to entrain, people need to be able to produce speech, they need to be able to understand the speech of their partner, and they need to be able to modify their speech to more closely match their partner. And so if you recall that earlier conversation that we watched, the one between the two girls that was very awkward, they were good at producing speech. They could certainly understand each other well, but they weren't modifying their speech to coordinate and align with one another. And so entrainment was very low and felt for all of us pretty unsuccessful. For people with neurological conditions, there is a lot more going on. It's more complicated. All of the building blocks can be affected. So I want to spend just a little time talking a little bit about what these neurological communication disorders are. So the technical term is called dysarthria. And so for people with dysarthria, the mere act of producing speech is difficult. So what this means is that they know what they want to say, the words are correct, they're all in the right order, but they come out sounding disordered or degraded. And so speech sounds slurry. We call this imprecise articulation. It lacks typical rhythm patterns, can be monotone, can be staccato. There are a lot of different ways that it can sound unusual. I'm going to play a few samples for you.
The nasty weather caused severe flooding.
So he's saying, the nasty weather caused severe flooding.
You wish to know more about my grandpa?
She's saying, you wish to know more about my grandpa. Okay, so for people with dysarthria, in their conversations, they have difficulty producing speech, their partner has difficulty understanding their speech, and the rest of that chain just breaks down. And so what I'm going to do is spend a little time talking, sort of moving away from entrainment now and talking about this production understanding piece, because as you see here, it's really important. So when we're talking to someone with dysarthria, we often think, well, if only they could speak more intelligibly, then I could better understand them. And this has actually been the basis for our current speech treatments for people with dysarthria. So currently in the clinical setting, SLPs will work with clients who have dysarthria and give them strategies that try and help them to speak better. So they'll give them strategies like talking louder, speaking more clearly. Unfortunately, however, while these strategies can be useful for some patients, they're not effective for all patients with dysarthria. And there is a number of reasons for this. People with neurological communication disorders have a lot of co-occurring difficulties that can make learning and maintaining learning difficult. These strategies also take intensive time, intensive drill work, and a lot of the times any changes that are seen in the clinic don't generalize to the real world, to their actual conversations. So when I moved into research, it was my goal to look at maybe could we change this. So an entirely valid way of thinking about this idea of speech being difficult to understand is recognizing that the speaker is really only half of the equation. So the definition of speech intelligibility is the accuracy with which a message is conveyed by a speaker, but also recovered by the listener. Or put another way, I like this quote a lot, speech intelligibility is as much in the ear of the listener as it is in the mouth of the speaker. And so what if instead of trying to make our patients speak better, we make the partner or the listener understand better? So this idea of training communication partners to better understand someone with a speech disorder is theoretically grounded in models of speech perception. So bear with me. So when listeners hear speech, so when you're listening to speech now, you're listening to me talk, it's a continuous acoustic signal. So what you're seeing up on the slide is continuous speech. Not like reading a book where you see the distinct words and it makes it much easier to break down. But what you have to do right now is break down this continuous acoustic signal into individual words and then identify the sounds and what those words are. The good thing is that when we encounter listeners who have familiar talking patterns, this process occurs with no apparent effort on your behalf. So let's try it. Well, you're trying it now because you're listening to me, but.
You wish to know more about my grandpa.
Okay, I'm sure most of you didn't need to think twice about where those boundaries went and what the phrase was. You wish to know more about my grandpa. However, when listeners encounter talkers with unfamiliar speech patterns or degraded speech patterns, this process becomes a lot more difficult. So let's try it again.
The is very small and yours.
Okay, so I imagine the idea or the thought process of deciding where to put those word boundaries in, this is actually the phrase, and determining what those words were was pretty challenging, right? So she's saying, though he is very small and short. So I'm going to play it once more.
The is very small and yours.
And here are those boundaries. So it turns out, though, that listeners can learn to better map those degraded cues onto meaningful sounds and words, and thus be better at understanding someone with a speech disorder. So this is known as perceptual learning, and perceptual learning describes this idea that with experience, listeners can learn to better recognize a speech signal that is initially difficult to understand. And so I imagine that you've all encountered or experienced this at some point in your own lives, right? You're talking to a new colleague or a new friend, and their kid runs up and says, blah, 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 and you think, ooh, what was that? And the parent says, oh, he wants an ice cream. So the parent has adapted to those pretty distorted speech sounds. Or maybe again, with someone with a foreign accent, it's hard for us out here. But when we arrived in the United States, my husband has a very thick Kiwi accent, and initially our new friends found it very difficult to understand him. I had to be a little bit of a translator, but of course now they understand him just fine. So this is this idea of becoming familiar and perceptually adapting to the speech signal. And so I've built a program of research looking at how we do this for people with neurological communication disorders. And I've really teased out listener factors, so what does the communication partner need to be able to do? Speaker factors, what type of speakers this works for? Training factors, how do we really get the best gains? All of these different factors to improve understanding. And this has allowed us to understand pretty deep theory about how and why this adaptation can take place. But at a very practical level, this work basically shows that we can teach communication partners to better understand someone with a speech disorder. So this figure here plots 9 of our studies in the area of communication partner training. They're color-coded by study. This data represents over 1,000 listeners, and the speakers here represent people with dysarthria following Parkinson's disease, stroke, brain tumors, brain traumas, and ALS. And so you can see some of the speakers have low very severely impaired intelligibility, so they start off really low. Some of the speakers have much higher intelligibility. But across the board, it doesn't matter the level of intelligibility that these speakers present with. Listeners who get communication partner training are able to much better understand the person with dysarthria following that training. And this has been a robust finding consistent across many of our studies in this area. And we've also shown that this is applicable for adults of all ages, including adults with hearing loss. So this figure here is just showing the green data point is our adults with hearing loss, whereas the purple is younger listeners, and then the red is our normal hearing older adult listeners, so those without hearing loss. And so you can see they all start off at pretty different levels. It's much harder to understand someone with a speech disorder if you have a hearing loss, but they all make significant jumps following training. So it's useful. Training is useful regardless of the starting point. So this was actually really important for us to establish. About 50% of all adults over the age of 75 suffer from a debilitating level of hearing loss. And of course, dysarthria is associated with conditions that often are associated with advanced age. So clinically, when I was working with patients, we would often have a situation where one person has this dysarthria and their partner has a hearing loss. And so you're actually working with two different communication difficulties and trying to understand. And so it was always very important for us that our research is practical as well and going to have clinical implications in the real world. And as you can see in this figure, our data also shows that communication partner training is beneficial for adolescent populations. So this includes adolescent speakers with dysarthria and also adolescent listeners. And so this application is relatively new and pretty exciting to me. So students with dysarthria, it's often the result of cerebral palsy, frequently report sparse and superficial relationships with their peers, with their teachers, because people can't understand them. And our research suggests that we can train a classroom full of peers, students, coaches, to better understand that particular student with dysarthria. So that's exciting for me. And we're now moving this work into clinical practice. So we've got an upcoming clinical trial that will rigorously establish the efficacy of this communication partner training in the real world. We're also in the process of linking back improved understanding back to entrainment, back to modifying, and ultimately back to conversational success. The whole point of all this work, if we return to the earlier part of the study, is to help people have more successful interactions with others. But as we've been learning, entrainment may, for some people, be pretty still difficult to achieve. And so we're also starting to consider other coordinating mechanisms or strategies that happen in conversations that can support conversational success or compensate if entrainment is in fact difficult to ultimately improve. And so we currently have a 5-year research study that's funded by the National Institutes of Health. This particular study is really focused on improving conversations for people with Parkinson's disease, but it also looks at improving conversations for all of us, even if we don't have a communication disorder, but just want better conversations. And so we record a lot of conversations, and more on that to come soon, but then we analyze these conversations and we look at things like, of course, producing speech, understanding speech, modifying speech. We look at entrainment of speech, we look at entrainment of language, but we also look at these other coordinating strategies that people can use. So we look at how people repair conversations when they break down. So this is me asking you to repeat yourself or to clarify if I'm not understanding what you're saying. Very recent data that's just emerged from our lab shows that in typical conversations, so in the conversations that all of us are having, conversations break down every 70 seconds. So every 70 seconds, we're going to have a mishap with our partner. And it's not problematic that these conversations break down. It's that they get repaired quickly and efficiently, and the conversation can keep moving. We also look at how partners take turns, how they navigate sharing of that conversational floor. We look at back channels. So these are signals that express interest and understanding in your conversational partner. So this is things like, yeah, okay, I get that. Or if you're a New Zealander, yeah, nah. Then map all of these behaviors to measures of conversational success. So things like productivity, problem solving, enjoyment, human connection. And then we look at which particular behaviors have the greatest impact on these successful metrics. And then these behaviors become the future treatment targets in a clinical trial to improve the conversations of people with Parkinson's disease. Interesting fact, we actually currently do not have any evidence-based treatments for directly improving conversations with people with Parkinson's disease. And my research over the next 5 years aims to change this. I think everyone deserves to be able to effectively participate in their everyday life. Okay, so to successfully do this study, you didn't get away with just a free lunch. To successfully do this study, we need to collect a lot of conversations. So we've got a quick recruitment video if you or anyone you know might be interested.
For this study, we are collecting conversations between people. I'm Annie Barrett, the project manager and participant coordinator for a large study we are currently running across the state of Utah. There are 2 groups of participants that we are currently recruiting. The first group consists of a person with Parkinson's disease and someone they know. This can be a spouse, a family member, or friend. We will record them having conversations together. The second group consists of people without Parkinson's disease or other neurological diseases. We need them and someone they know. These pairs will also have conversations with each other. Then we will bring both groups together to have conversations with the people that they do not know. In addition to having conversations, you will also complete a hearing screening, a cognitive test, and communication questionnaires. We are mobile and can come to your home, or we can meet at a neutral location near you. In the past, we've used libraries, community centers, and churches across Utah. Thank you.
Okay, so we also have a team of researchers here, Annie Barrett, but also Samantha Budge and Katie. So if anyone is interested, you're welcome to chat with them, or in your brochure there's a QR code which will lead you to some contact details. But as we come to the close of this talk, I just actually want to leave you with a very simple fact that conversations are co-created. And so the next time that you find yourself in a difficult conversation, so maybe with someone with a communication disorder, maybe someone with a foreign accent, or maybe someone who it's just really difficult to connect with, what role can you play to ensure or to improve success? Can you pay closer attention to better understand what they're saying? Can you match their speech patterns or use some of the same words that they're using? Can you signal interest and understanding, take turns well and share that conversational floor? Can you think about what to do if there's a conversational breakdown? If your partner misses a step, help them find it again. In good conversations, we are dynamically adjusting in all of the moments, creating something beautiful together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Borrie. What a wonderful presentation. Part of what we like to do at these events is start a conversation with all of you. And so we've got about 15 minutes now where Dr. Borrie is happy to take questions, comments from you about this topic. And so I'll start with a question, and then please raise your hand, and I'm going to bring the mic to you so that everyone can hear your question. And so, Dr. Borrie, if I have a member of my family who has Parkinson's, and I really want to start thinking about how I can do something today to be able to better interact with that person, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things. Certainly taking time, paying a lot closer attention to understanding what they're saying. Make sure that you're facing them close, face to face. Make sure that there's not a whole lot of background noise happening. Really being an active participant as you're engaging with them, not expecting that they need to bring it, that they need to get better. You actually have a huge role to play. And then of course consider reaching out for help, for connections. But yeah, I just think owning your role in the conversation, navigating with them when a conversation breaks down. What do you want me to do? What do you want us to do together to fix it? Do you want me to jump in if I know what you're going to say? Do you want me to offer suggestions? Or do you want me to just give you more time to repeat yourself? Do you want to try different ways of saying it? So I think talking through, knowing that the conversation's going to break down at times, and talking through what do we want to do together to be able to support it when it does break down. Yeah, but I just think owning that, paying closer attention, giving them more time, making sure that you're asking them questions, involving them is really important.
So managing conflict is one of the most important things you do with communication, and it's intrinsically uncomfortable. Particularly working from this paradigm of entrainment and mirroring, how is that paradigm altered when managing a conflict, either between two congenial parties or in an explicitly adversarial relationship? Can entrainment be denied, altered, so forth?
Yeah, this is a great question, and the realm of conflict is not something that I study, but I can talk to the literature that I've read for sure. So we definitely entrain when we like the person, and we definitely disentrain when we're not happy with what's happening. Can people exploit this? Yes, but the thing is with entrainment is it's so subtle. So once it becomes very conscious, so if someone starts to, really consciously mimic you, or consciously use too many of the same words, it becomes very obvious, and then it's no longer entrainment, then it's mimicry. And so this idea of exploiting is still very new in the literature of how it could be used, but we do know that when people are enjoying the conversation, it's feeling super productive, there's a lot more entrainment. And when people are on different pages, they're not communicating well, which is what happens in conflict, there's low levels of entrainment. Hope that answers it.
I guess one other little area.
Yeah.
In a congenial conflict, where someone...
Oh yeah, if it's congenial and you're on the same page, I can see that having very high entrainment, right? There's some debates and conflicts that are, they flow very well. You're sort of bouncing off each other's ideas. When we're bouncing off each other's ideas, when we're cutting in, but the other person likes the cutting in, that's when we're really entrained. Sometimes you have difficulty where you have someone who likes to make a lot of interjections, someone who really doesn't like that communication style. Now, neither one is better, but you put the two people together and it really breaks down that ability to match and similar. So it's not, while we have some knowledge of what makes people better in trainers and worse in trainers, it's also just the matching of the communication partner pair that matters a lot. So you can have people who maybe are a little bit quieter, take a little bit more time in conversation, and you put them with another person who also has that same conversational style, and they're highly entrained. And so there's this individual piece, but then there's also this communication style piece as well. Yeah.
Great presentation, Dr. Borrie. Thank you very much. I had a question. I really enjoy the dance partner metaphor with its entrainment piece, and I'm kind of thinking in the population as a whole before we enter clinical populations, this individual variability piece. Do you think some people just belong on Dancing with the Stars, where others can only cha-cha, where some only have 2 left feet?
I do.
And so then when we enter a neurological, or after following a neurological injury or accident, then we have differences in outcomes due to that variability pre-condition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's both things are true. There is a wide range of abilities, even in typical populations, of people's ability to entrain and not entrain. And so we know this from our research and from other people's research, that some people are just better in trainers than others, and we've started to tease out what these individual factors are that make people better in trainers. But sure, so you have someone who it's difficult to entrain, and then they have a neurological condition, and it makes it even harder, of course. But I don't think neurological conditions are sort of targeting people who are bad in trainers. I think, unfortunately, they target across the population. And so we can account for all of that individual variability within our studies. Yeah. It's a great question. And yes, wouldn't we all want to be better in trainers? But I think even just knowing that conversation is co-created, I think it helps you go into the conversation with more of a sense of, I'm not just going to let this play out. Like, what can I do? Can I pick up on the cues that they're using? Can I like move in sync with them? You know, I think even having that level of awareness can greatly improve just your daily conversations. Yeah.
Thank you. I was really curious about your studies that you said you could maybe do in schools or with the classroom. So just maybe you can say, like, is that like a one-time thing? You'd be able to meet with the class and have a significant difference, or what kind of time frame are you looking at?
Yeah, so it's a great thing. That's a great question. The clinical trial that we're doing to establish this as a clinical program, it's 2 weeks, and I think it's, gosh, let me think of the details, every day, but it's done on a computer and it's about 15 minutes, and so people can sit with headphones and do it in their own time. I think it's a 2-week protocol. It is a 2-week protocol. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. 3 all of a sudden on this side of the room. Here we go. I didn't see, who was the first hand over there?
Thank you. Are there times where, I've just been introduced to entrainment, so I'm trying to wrap my head around a little bit, but are there times where we should perhaps not be seeking to entrain with the person we're talking to, such as a couple examples might be, if someone is really upset and, super intense, if I match that, can tend to escalate it, where maybe if I try to more consciously try to slow the pace, hopefully that they'll be the dance leader in the partnership. Different example, I have a friend with cerebral palsy who very difficult for most people to understand, and I think they mistake his ability to communicate with his ability to understand.
Absolutely.
And he is very intelligent, and so like if I'm slowing my speech, I'm kind of like doing him a disservice, because now he thinks that I think he's less capable. So just wondering if that's kind of factored into entrainment training. Yeah. And are there ways to access, that the public can access such training?
Yes, so entrainment training is not currently a thing. We know that entrainment is important, we know that it happens, we know it breaks down, and now we're looking at, in this study over the next 5 years, how do we use that to how do we train with that? So there's no research looking at how to train entrainment. But to your point of, now I'm blanking, your friend with cerebral palsy, so you wouldn't slow down to the same level as your friend, because that feels like more mimicry. But so I'm naturally an extremely fast talker. So if I slow down enough to make the person feel like there is more time, there's more space, that can also help them feel like we're more similar. So it's not always that we have to match someone perfectly. It's this, I'm going to change what I normally do to be more closer to you, even if it means that we're still a little bit far away. Does that make sense?
I think so. It seems like almost kind of like trying to read the needs of our partner.
Very much so.
Kind of match my communication to how they receive it, and so we're not exactly talking the same or listening the same, but trying to perceive what they are, what works for them, and maybe give some signals if their speech is difficult for me to understand, and ask them to slow their speech, or modify it however that would help me to have more clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I think that we do, like, I think one of the figures I showed, like, people do kind of change in sync. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sort of lost my thought, actually. But people change in sync. I've lost my thought. I'm happy to powwow this with you afterwards.
I think we had a question, yes.
You've really caught my interest. I've been teaching at the prison for 40 years. There should be an entrainment training. Bottom line, many guards have never gone, they have a high school degree. I teach communication of all things.
Yay.
And so oftentimes there's such a breakdown the guard who thinks they're God, and they have the gun, and they have and the inmate is a piece of crap. So the guard always thinks they're right, and the way they respond is go over there and do that and shut up. Versus, so one thing I fortunately do some work with it, and one thing I try to do is say, you know, that person's not a number. They all have a number, but they have a name, and try to humanize a little bit. And so it really strikes me. I mean, I could talk for a long time, but there are significant issues because they don't want to be untrained.
No.
They don't want to understand this person's a human being. They say, well, I've seen it 100 times. You're not an exception. Get over there and do it. But anyway, I think it's very significant that we recognize also if we're dealing with a child or whatever. Lately, a couple of people, a very close friend of me, have had mental issues because of being on drugs and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. So it seems like just trying to be a better, that's what I really got out of this, be so much better listener and try to mirror and do the things you do. Anyway, just a little trivia there.
No, I like that. People actually, there is a literature, and it's again not my literature, but there is a literature of people moving away from entrainment if the person is not someone that they want to associate with. And so if the person is from a country that they have some issues with, they'll disentrain. So there's this very sort of need to disentrain. And so that sounds like maybe that's happening there. It's sort of subconscious, but it's like, I don't want to be like you, and so I won't. And this then makes the conversation even harder to achieve any sort of collaboration. Yeah. But thanks for your thoughts, they're really useful. Yeah.
Doctor, if I may, you said that every situation is, of course, unique. Every patient is unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're talking about, this training as kind of a co-training between the listener and the speaker. But yet, as you go into some of these relationships, for instance, an older person with Alzheimer's, whose circle of people they deal with is going to shrink.
Yes.
Until it comes down to caregivers. And on the other hand, maybe an adolescent whose circuit of people they deal with is just going to expand.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do in terms, or what should be done in terms of tilting the balance as to where the training goes to the listener or to the speaker?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think a lot of people think this, and a lot of people have said that to us, like, well, as people get older, their social circle decreases, and so what does training do for just a few of their partners? But if people who are over the age of 60, I think it's 75% of their interactions is with people, if they're familiar partners, with a few different people. And so training those people will have a massive difference on their quality of life. And so I don't think the number of communication partners one has should change how we decide who's a candidate for this listener training. But I think thinking about where people spend a lot of their time. And so, yeah, if it's a student who has a very large social circle, it can be easy to train a classroom and peers, but it's difficult to train all of the other new people that they're going to meet because of those difficulties of just not having access to those people. And then for older people who have a smaller social circle, I think it's easy to train a few people and hit most of their interactions. So the balance of speaker and listener, I think speaker strategies are still important. I think that listener and speaker strategies probably work really well in tandem. The issue is, regardless of the importance of these speaker strategies, the key issue is that they're not very effective for all people. So you can train someone and say, well, it would be useful if they could speak more intelligibly. Sure, that would be helpful. But we know from the research that these strategies are really hard for people to do and to maintain. And so when that is the case, I think having alternative solutions is going to be really important, even if they don't hit everyone's communication possibilities.
Within a classroom setting, would you think that teacher training?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is going to run into this more than once?
Yeah, teachers, I think coaches, right, sports coaches, anyone who is interacting with say, the particular student would be useful to learn those speech patterns. And you're right, it's unique and individual, so people get trained on the speech patterns of a particular person. But there is some generalization, but that's another whole area.
To maybe continue with that, what are the interventions, what are the practices that you're studying? What are you hoping for? And I think you've listed those, but maybe to summarize that again, what are the strategies?
So there's two different kind of key ones. One is this communication partner training, so training a listener to better understand them, so they sit in front of a computer and run through a training program. The other, and that we're looking at over the next 5 years, is looking at all of the other coordination strategies, entrainment, but also the back channels, the conversational repairs, all of these different coordination behaviors that occur in conversations, and then looking at which ones have the greatest impact, and then developing training programs on those ones. So instead of just training on anything, we're trying to determine which are hypothesis-driven treatment targets to be working on. How do we get the best bang for our buck, essentially?
We have time for one more question. Someone have a burning question?
It's a lot of pressure, Lisa. It's got to be burning.
Any question? Yes, we have got one.
I already had one, so if anyone else wants one.
No one else wants one. You've got it.
I'm just curious if you've read The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch.
I haven't.
It's very interesting. That looks at all kinds of different brain condition struggles, anywhere from like major traumatic brain injuries to I think just biological things that, I don't know, and trainings that were done to help people make huge leaps in ways that were thought like that couldn't be fixed. But yeah.
I will read it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Changes itself.
The Brain That Changes Itself. Take a note. Thank you.
Okay, let's all give Dr. Borrie a round of applause.